At 6:27 a.m., Evan Mercer was already late. He grabbed his keys, stepped outside, and stopped so fast the coffee in his hand sloshed over the lid. A dark gray sedan was sitting sideways across his driveway. Not parked, blocking completely. Evan stood there for one long second, waiting for the driver to notice him. Nothing. The engine was off. The windows were tinted, and whoever was inside was not moving. A slow, irritated breath left his nose. Seriously. He walked down the driveway, boots hitting the concrete harder than usual. The morning air still carried that damp suburban chill, sprinklers ticking somewhere down the block like everything was normal. Except this was not normal. He knocked twice on the driver's side window, sharp, controlled. "Hey, you are blocking my driveway." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the window lowered just 2 inches. Not enough to see clearly, just enough for a woman's voice to slip through. "Give me a minute." Evan blinked. A minute. Like she was parked at a curb, like he was the inconvenience. His jaw tightened. "I do not have a minute." Still no movement inside the car, no apology, no sign she was reaching for the gear shift. Just silence. Heavy. Intentional. Something cold began to slide under Evan's skin. He stepped closer and leaned down, trying to see past the dark tint. That was when the window lowered another inch. Morning light cut across the driver's face, and the second Evan saw who was sitting behind the wheel, the irritation in his chest dropped straight into something much heavier, because this was not a stranger, not even close. For a moment, Evan forgot what he was about to say. The woman behind the wheel was not a stranger, not even close. Lena Whitaker sat in his driveway like this was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. Like she had not just boxed him in before sunrise. Like she had not just spoken to him through a 2-inch crack in the window as if he were the inconvenience. His ex-wife's older sister. Of course it was. Evan felt something tight pull across his chest. "You have got to be kidding me." Lena's eyes lifted fully to his now, calm and steady. She did not look surprised to see him. If anything, she looked like she had been expecting this exact reaction. "Morning, Evan." Her voice was smooth, professional, too controlled for 6:30 in the morning in a quiet suburban driveway. Evan straightened slowly, every muscle in his shoulders tightening. "What are you doing blocking my driveway?" He did not phrase it like a question. Lena did not answer right away. Instead, she glanced down toward her lap. Evan followed the movement and saw the edge of her phone in her hand, screen still lit. Her thumb moved once across it, deliberate, like she was finishing something before giving him her full attention. The pause stretched just long enough to irritate him. Finally, she looked back up. "I needed to talk to you." Evan let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite contained. "You could have called. You could have texted. You could have not parked in my driveway like this." For the first time, something faint shifted in Lena's expression. Not embarrassment, not apology, something closer to patience running thin. "You do not answer my calls." His jaw flexed. That landed closer to the truth than he liked. "Still, this is not normal behavior, Lena." He gestured toward the car, palm open in disbelief. "You cannot just trap people in their own driveway because they missed your call." Across the street, a garage door began to rise with a low mechanical hum. The normal sounds of morning were getting louder now. A neighbor's kid jogged past the corner with earbuds in, completely unaware of the tension sitting thick in the air between them. Lana remained exactly where she was. Calm. Centered. Too composed for someone who had just ambushed him before work. "I will only take a minute," she said. She repeated it the same way she had before. flat, measured. Like the words had already been practiced. Something cold slid along the back of Evan's neck. He crossed his arms slowly over his chest. "You have 30 seconds before I call for a tow." That finally got a reaction. Small, but real. Lena's lips pressed together for half a second. Her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, like she was recalibrating. Then she reached for the door handle and pushed it open. The movement was unhurried, careful, like she was very aware that he was watching everything. When Lena stepped out of the sedan, the early morning light caught the side of her face, and Evan noticed two things at the exact same time. First, she was dressed like she was heading into a corporate meeting. Cream blouse, dark tailored slacks, low heels that were absolutely not meant for someone running quick errands at dawn. Second, there was someone else in the car. Evan's attention snapped past her shoulder before he could stop himself. The passenger seat. He had been so focused on Lena that he had not properly scanned the rest of the vehicle. Now that he did, his stomach tightened hard. There was a man sitting in the front passenger seat. Still. Too still. Not scrolling on a phone, not looking around. Just sitting there, partially shadowed behind the tinted glass. Watching. A slow, uneasy pressure began building behind Evan's ribs. He shifted his weight slightly, eyes narrowing. "Who is that?" Lena did not answer immediately. Instead, she closed her car door with quiet precision and turned to face him fully. Her posture was straight, almost formal, like she had stepped into the opening moment of a meeting instead of a confrontation in his driveway. "You should not jump to conclusions," she said. Evan felt irritation spike hotter in his chest. "I did not ask for advice. I asked, who is in your car?" For the first time, Lena's composure showed the smallest crack. A faint breath. A subtle tightening around her eyes that most people probably would have missed. Evan did not miss it. She turned slightly and tapped once on the passenger window. Light. Controlled. Inside the car, the man shifted forward into the morning light. And the second Evan saw his face clearly, the ground under him felt like it tilted just a few degrees off balance, because he recognized him. Not well, but enough to make his pulse start pounding in his ears, and suddenly the blocked driveway felt like the least of his problems. Evan took one slow step closer before he realized he was moving. The passenger window was darker than the driver's side, but the early morning sun was starting to cut across the glass at just the right angle. Not enough to fully reveal the man inside, enough to outline him. Broad shoulders, still posture. Watching. Evan's throat tightened slightly. "Who is that?" His voice came out lower this time. Less sharp. More cautious than he wanted it to sound. Lena did not answer immediately. She stood beside the car with that same controlled posture, hands loosely together in front of her, like she had already run through this moment in her head several times. "You should not jump ahead of yourself," she said quietly. Evan felt irritation spike, quick and hot. "I am not jumping ahead. There's a man sitting in your car in my driveway. I think I'm allowed to ask who he is." The neighborhood was fully waking now. A pickup truck rolled slowly down the street. Somewhere 2 houses over, a radio clicked on through an open garage. Ordinary sounds layered over a morning that suddenly did not feel ordinary at all. Inside the sedan, the man finally moved. Not quickly, not nervously. Deliberate. He leaned forward just enough for the light to reach his face. And Evan felt something in his stomach drop hard. Marcus Hale. The name surfaced instantly, sharp and unwelcome. Regional manager, auto parts supplier. The man who had been calling the shop for the past 3 months in that polite corporate tone that always carried an edge underneath. The man who had flagged Evan's account twice already. The man who, just last week, had reminded Evan in a calm, measured voice that delayed payments had consequences. Evan's pulse started pounding in his ears. What is he doing here? This time the question was not directed only at Lena. Marcus did not open the door. He did not roll the window down further. He just sat there, hands resting loosely together, observing the exchange like he was gathering information he might need later. It made Evan's skin crawl. Lena finally spoke. "I told you, we need to talk." Evan let out a short, disbelieving breath. "You bring my supplier rep to my house at sunrise and block my driveway to talk." His voice was getting tighter now. The control he had started the morning with was beginning to thin around the edges. You people have phones, offices, normal ways of doing this. Across the street, a curtain shifted, someone watching. Perfect. Lena's tone stayed frustratingly even. This could not wait. That landed wrong in Evan's chest, not loud, but heavy. He shifted his weight, folding his arms tighter across his chest, trying to push back the uneasy pressure building behind his ribs. "It is about invoices, then say it," he muttered. "I already spoke to your team last week." Lena's eyes held his steadily. "It is not just invoices." The words slid into the space between them and stayed there. Evan felt something cold begin to move through his gut. Because Lena did not look smug. She did not look like someone here to lecture him. She looked careful, measured, like someone handling something fragile and potentially messy. Evan's jaw tightened. Then what is it? For the first time, Lena glanced briefly toward Marcus in the passenger seat. A quick look, but meaningful. When her eyes returned to Evan, her voice was quieter. "Your account review was flagged again last night." The air in Evan's chest stalled. He had expected pressure. He had expected warnings. He had not expected this tight, controlled seriousness. "So what?" he said. But the edge in his voice was thinner now. "We have been through this." "Not like this," Lena replied. A slow, uncomfortable silence settled over the driveway. The sun had climbed just enough to stretch long shadows across the concrete. Evan could feel the morning slipping sideways, that familiar sense that the day was no longer following the shape he expected. His fingers curled slightly against his arms. Because deep down, under the irritation and the pride and the weeks of financial strain pressing in from every direction, something in Lena's tone had just made this feel a lot more serious than late payments. And Marcus Hale was still sitting in that passenger seat, watching everything. Evan dragged a hand slowly down the front of his face. The skin there felt tight, too warm for the cool morning air. This was already off the rails. The blocked driveway had been irritating. Lena showing up unannounced had been worse. But the moment Marcus Hale leaned forward into the light, something deeper had started shifting under Evan's ribs. Now Lena stood a few feet away from him, perfectly composed, like they were about to discuss quarterly numbers instead of whatever this was. "Just say it," Evan muttered. His voice was lower now, rough around the edges. "Whatever this is, say it." For a moment, Lena did not speak. She studied him. Not the dismissive glance she used to give him at family gatherings years ago. This was more focused, more careful, like she was measuring how much pressure he could take before something snapped. That look alone made irritation crawl back up Evan's spine. Then she finally spoke. "Your account review was flagged again last night." Evan's shoulders stiffened. There it was. Numbers, payments, the same drumbeat that had been following him for months. "So what?" he said quickly. We already talked about that with your people. His tone came out sharper than he intended, defensive before he could stop himself. Behind Lena, Marcus remained in the passenger seat, still as a parked statue, watching, not interrupting, not helping, just observing. It made Evan's jaw tighten harder. "Not like this," Lena replied. The words were quiet, but they landed heavier than they should have. Evan felt a small pulse of unease move through his gut. He pushed it down immediately. "Then maybe you should move your car and schedule a normal meeting like a normal person." His patience was thinning now, fast. The early sun had climbed higher, throwing long, clean shadows across the driveway. A jogger passed the end of the street, sneakers hitting pavement in steady rhythm. Ordinary life continuing like nothing was wrong. Except something clearly was. Lena exhaled slowly. Not dramatic, not frustrated, measured. "You're about to lose your supplier line." The sentence dropped into the morning like a wrench hitting concrete. Hard. Final. Evan blinked once, twice. For half a second, his brain did not fully process the words. Then his stomach fell straight down. What? It came out lower than before, less sharp, more wary. "Lena did not look away. Unless we fix what is actually happening here." A tight pressure began building behind Evan's sternum. He hated that phrase. Actually happening. It implied there was something he did not see yet. Something sitting just outside his control. His fingers flexed once against his crossed arms. "We are behind," he said, "not dead. I already told your people we are catching up this month." He heard the edge in his own voice. Heard the strain he had been trying to hide for weeks now. Lena's expression did not change. This is not just about being behind. There was no accusation in her tone. That was what made it worse. Evan felt the first real crack in his composure. A thin line of heat crept up the back of his neck. His heartbeat was louder now, heavy and uneven in his ears. Then what is it? The question came out tighter than he wanted. For the first time since she arrived, Lena hesitated. It was brief. Most people might have missed it. Evan did not. Her eyes flicked once toward Marcus in the passenger seat, a small movement, but deliberate. When she looked back at Evan, her voice was quieter than before. "There are discrepancies in your account activity." The word hit wrong. Discrepancies. Not late, not overdue. Discrepancies. A cold feeling slid slowly through Evan's stomach. He forced a short breath out through his nose. What kind of discrepancies? But even as the question left his mouth, something ugly and defensive was already rising in his chest. Because deep down, under the exhaustion and the pressure and the pride he had been holding together with sheer stubbornness, this no longer felt like a simple money problem. And the worst part, Marcus Hale was still sitting in that car, watching every single reaction Evan failed to hide. The word discrepancies did not leave Evan's head. It sat there, heavy and wrong, like a loose bolt rattling somewhere deep in an engine you could not shut off. He uncrossed his arms slowly, more to release the pressure building in his chest than because he meant to. What kind of discrepancies? His voice came out flatter now, controlled in that careful way he used with difficult customers at the shop. Lena did not answer right away. That hesitation again. Small, measured, too deliberate to be comfortable. She glanced once toward the passenger seat. Not long. Just enough to confirm Marcus was still watching. Of course he was. Then she looked back at Evan. "Inventory orders that do not match delivery confirmations," she said quietly. "Payment timestamps that overlap in ways they should not." Each word landed with surgical precision. Evan felt irritation surge fast and hot. "That is accounting noise," he said immediately. Happens all the time. You know that. He heard the edge creeping back into his own voice and hated it, but the alternative was letting that cold feeling in his gut grow bigger. Lena's expression stayed calm. Too calm. Not at this scale. The phrase hit harder than the others. Evan's jaw tightened. Across the street, the neighbor who'd been jogging earlier was now stretching beside his mailbox, pretending not to look over. The morning sun was fully up now, bright and exposing, like it was determined to make this moment as public as possible. Evan lowered his voice slightly. Then your system is wrong. It came out defensive, sharper than he intended. Because the alternative thought had just brushed the edge of his mind and he did not like it one bit. Lena studied him carefully. Evan, she said, softer now, we pulled 3 months of activity. His stomach gave a slow, unpleasant twist. 3 months. That was not a routine check. That was a deep look. He shifted his weight, trying to keep his posture loose even though his shoulders were starting to feel tight. And the word came out short, because if she'd come this far, there was definitely an and. Lena exhaled slowly. There are orders marked fulfilled that never cleared standard delivery verification. For a second, Evan just stared at her. Then irritation flared again, fast and defensive. You think I am making up deliveries now? His voice came out rougher than before. Lena did not flinch. I think something in your account activity does not make sense. That careful phrasing again, not accusing, not backing off, just placing the weight directly in front of him. Behind her, Marcus finally shifted slightly in the passenger seat. Not getting out. Not interrupting. Just adjusting his posture like he was settling in for a longer observation. It made something ugly twist in Evan's chest. You brought him here to audit me in my own driveway. The words slipped out before he could fully filter them. Lena's eyes flicked toward Marcus again, then back to Evan. He is here because if this escalates formally, he is the one who signs off on supplier actions. Supplier actions. The phrase hit like cold water. Evan felt his pulse pick up speed. You could have handled this over the phone. His voice was quieter now, less sharp, more strained. Lena's expression finally shifted. Not frustration, not superiority, concern. That was worse. You have not been returning calls, Evan. The words were gentle, too gentle. Something in his chest pulled tight. He hated that she was right. For the past few weeks, he'd been screening more calls than usual, letting some emails sit longer than he should have, telling himself he would catch up once the shop stabilized, once things leveled out, once the next round of payments cleared. Normal business triage. That was what he had told himself. Evan rubbed the back of his neck roughly. There's nothing wrong with my deliveries. The sentence came out quieter now, not as solid as he wanted. Lena watched him for a long moment. Then she said the one thing that finally drove a thin crack straight through his remaining control. Then you should have no problem explaining the gaps. Silence settled hard across the driveway. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Evan became suddenly aware of his own breathing. Too shallow, too fast. Because for the first time since this conversation started, a small, unwelcome thought had begun to form in the back of his mind. Not panic, not yet, but something close. Because the truth was, the last 3 months at the shop had been messy. Too many rush orders. Too many late nights. Too many moments where he had trusted the numbers would sort themselves out once things slowed down. And now, Marcus Hale was sitting 10 feet away. Quiet. Patient. Watching for the exact moment Evan ran out of clean answers. Evan hated the silence. It pressed in from every direction, from the quiet street, from Lena's steady eyes, from Marcus sitting in that passenger seat like a witness who did not need to speak to make things worse. He rolled his shoulders once, trying to loosen the tightness creeping into his neck. There are no gaps. The words came out too fast, too firm. Even to his own ears, they sounded like something he was trying to convince himself of. Lena did not immediately challenge him. That almost made it worse. She simply watched him, head slightly tilted, like she was waiting to see what he would do next without pushing him there. Evan forced a slow breath in through his nose. "You are looking at raw system noise," he continued, voice more measured now. "We have been running high volume the last few months. Things overlap. Happens all the time in small shops." He knew the explanation sounded reasonable, because parts of it were true. The shop had been slammed since early spring. 2 techs short. Supply chain delays. Customers stacking up work faster than they could clear bays. Messy, but manageable. Or at least it had felt that way until this morning. Lena's gaze did not waver. "Walk me through your fulfillment process," she said. Not aggressive, not accusatory, professional. That tone hit a nerve. Evan's jaw flexed. "You already know how our process works. Walk me through your version," she repeated. The calm persistence scraped along his nerves like sandpaper. Across the street, the neighbor who had been stretching finally went inside, but Evan could still feel the weight of unseen eyes from behind other windows. The sun was higher now, washing the driveway in bright, unforgiving light. He hated having this conversation out here. Hated that Marcus was still in the car. Hated the slow pressure building behind his ribs. Fine. Evan rubbed a hand across the back of his neck, buying himself half a second to think. "Orders come in through the supplier portal," he said. "We batch by priority. Parts get logged when they arrive. Install tickets close the loop once the job is done. Standard. Clean. On paper." Lena listened without interrupting. Then she asked quietly, "Who logs the final delivery confirmations?" The question landed harder than it should have. Evan felt a small flicker of heat in his chest. "My floor lead handles most of that," he said. "Sometimes me, if we are backed up." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "Name?" He hesitated. It was brief, barely noticeable, but it was there. "Tony Ruiz," he said finally. Lena nodded once like she had expected that answer. "And how often are you personally reviewing the matched records?" Evan exhaled slowly. Here it was, the weak spot. He shifted his weight again, suddenly aware of how stiff his shoulders felt. "We spot check," he said. "Weekly, when things are normal. Lately, it has been more like bi-weekly. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew. Too honest, too exposed." Lena's expression did not change, but something in her posture settled into place, like a final piece of a puzzle sliding where it belonged. "Bi-weekly during your highest volume quarter," she said softly. Not a question, a statement. Evan felt irritation flare again, sharp and defensive. "We have been short-staffed." The words came out rougher than he intended. "I am covering 2 roles half the time." For the first time, Lena's face showed something close to understanding. Not sympathy, but recognition. "I know you've been under pressure," she said. That almost made it worse. Evan dragged a hand through his hair, frustration finally cracking through the tight control he had been holding all morning. "Then say what you came here to say." His voice dropped lower. Because whatever this was, it had clearly moved past routine account noise. Behind Lena, Marcus finally shifted forward slightly in his seat. Still silent, still watching, waiting. And deep in Evan's gut, something cold was starting to take shape. Because for the first time since this conversation began, he was no longer completely sure the numbers would clean themselves up on their own. The morning air felt heavier now, not physically, but but the kind of weight that builds when a conversation crosses an invisible line and everyone present knows it. Evan stood at the edge of his own driveway, jaw tight, shoulders stiff, trying very hard not to show how much the last few minutes had gotten under his skin. Lena watched him with that same measured focus. Then she spoke. "We are seeing fulfillment confirmations posted before verified delivery scans." Each word landed slow and precise. Evan felt irritation spike again, quick and defensive. "That can happen if the tech closes the ticket early," he said. "Happens all the time when we are buried." His voice was steady, but inside something had started to itch. Lena did not push back immediately. Instead, she reached into the passenger side through the still open driver door and pulled out a thin tablet. The motion was smooth, practiced, not improvised. That alone made something tighten in Evan's chest. She tapped the screen once, then turned it slightly so he could see. Not close enough to read every detail. Close enough to recognize the layout. Supplier dashboard, his account. Evan's pulse ticked up. "This is last Thursday," Lena said quietly. Her finger moved across the screen. 3 orders marked fulfilled at your shop within a 14-minute window. She let the number hang in the air. Evan forced himself not to lean in. "We batch close sometimes," he said, "if installs finish back to back." Reasonable, logical, he clung to that. Lena's finger moved again. The delivery confirmations for those parts did not clear until 2 hours later. That cold feeling in Evan's stomach spread a little wider. "System lag," he said quickly. "You know those scans do not always post in real time." For the first time since this started, Marcus shifted more noticeably in the passenger seat. Not interrupting. Just leaning forward slightly, forearms resting loosely on his knees. Watching closer now. Evan felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. Lena's voice stayed even. "It is possible." A beat of silence, then she added softer. "It is just not consistent with the pattern we are seeing." Pattern? There was that word again. Evan's chest tightened. He forced out a slow breath through his nose. "You keep saying pattern like this is some kind of scheme." The last word came out sharper than he intended. Across the street, a car door slammed. Someone started their engine. Life, continuing like nothing, was cracking open in the middle of his morning. Lena held his gaze. "I am saying the data does not line up cleanly, not accusing, not backing down." That careful middle ground was starting to get under Evan's skin in a way open blame might not have. He scrubbed a hand over his mouth, then dropped it to his side. "You think I am cooking my own books now? It came out rough, too raw." For the first time, Lena's expression shifted with something closer to concern than corporate distance. "I think something in your process is breaking under pressure," she said quietly. That landed differently. Not hostile, not forgiving either, just dangerous. Because part of Evan knew exactly how strained the last few months had been. Too many rush jobs. Too many late nights where Tony closed tickets fast just to keep the backlog from exploding. Too many times Evan himself had glanced at the numbers and told himself he would do a deeper review once things slowed down, once things stabilized, once he could breathe again. He swallowed once, throat dry. What happens if your people decide they do not like what they are seeing? The question came out lower. Careful. Lena did not sugarcoat it. Supplier review escalates. Her voice stayed calm. Credit terms tighten first, then shipment holds. Then account suspension if discrepancies cannot be resolved. Each step landed like a weight on Evan's chest. Tighten. Hold, suspend. The morning suddenly felt very bright, too bright. Evan looked past her for half a second, eyes landing briefly on Marcus in the passenger seat. still watching, still silent, waiting for the moment this tipped from concern into action. Evan exhaled slowly, but the breath did not loosen the pressure building under his ribs, because for the first time since Lena's car appeared in his driveway, the situation was no longer abstract. It had shape now, timeline, consequences, and the worst part sitting heavy in the back of his mind. If the numbers really were off. He was not entirely sure when things had started slipping. Evan stared at the tablet in Lena's hand, but he was not really seeing the numbers anymore. He was seeing the last 3 months. Late nights at the shop. Stacks of invoices waiting for review, Tony moving fast across the service floor, closing tickets with that rushed efficiency that had felt like a lifesaver at the time. Now it sat differently in his chest, heavy, uneven. He dragged a slow breath in through his nose. You are basing all this on timestamp drift and scan lag. The words sounded thinner than he wanted. Lena did not immediately answer. That silence again, measured, patient, like she was giving him space to hear himself. Evan hated that. He shifted his weight, boots scraping lightly against the concrete. The sound felt too loud in the quiet morning. We have been pushing volume, he continued. When bays are backed up, tickets close fast. That is normal shop flow. Part of him believed what he was saying. Part of him was starting not to. Lena's voice came softer this time. Walk me through last Thursday. His stomach gave a small, unwelcome drop. He kept his face neutral. Standard day, busy. Her eyes held his. Which tech handled the 3 back-to-back installs? Evan did not answer immediately. The name was already sitting in his throat. Tony. He forced it out a second later. Tony Ruiz. Lena nodded once, like she had expected that answer. And you personally verified the parts were on site before those tickets closed. Not a question. Carefully phrased. Evan felt something tight pull behind his ribs. We do not babysit every box that comes through the door, he said. My lead logs intake, that is the system. Lena did not push, but she did not look convinced either. Behind her, Marcus shifted slightly again in the passenger seat. Still silent. Still taking everything in like he was building a quiet mental file. Evan rubbed the side of his jaw roughly. Look, he said, voice lower now. If there is noise in the system, we can clean it up. Happens all the time when shops scale fast. There, an opening, a reasonable one. For the first time since this started, Lena's expression softened just slightly. That is what I'm hoping, she said. Hoping? Not sure. The word sat wrong in Evan's gut. Because Lena Whitaker was not the type to drive across town before sunrise on hope alone. The morning sun had climbed higher now, bright enough to reflect off the sedan's windshield and throw sharp light across the driveway. Evan squinted slightly, suddenly aware of how exposed this whole moment felt. What exactly are you asking me to do? The question came out quieter. Less defensive, more tired. Lena lowered the tablet slowly. I need you to pull your internal logs for the last 90 days. 90 days. Evan's stomach tightened again. And her eyes held his. I need you to personally verify intake against fulfillment on the flagged orders. The pressure behind his eyes pulsed once. Hard. You are asking me to audit my own floor. Not accusatory, but not comfortable either. Lena gave a small nod. Before this escalates formally. There it was, the line in the sand. Across the street, a delivery truck rumbled past, the low engine vibration rolling through the quiet neighborhood. Evan barely registered it, because something colder had started settling into his chest. Not panic, not yet, but doubt, thin, sharp, persistent. He folded his arms again, but the movement lacked the earlier confidence. And if I find nothing, Lena answered without hesitation. Then we close the review and move on. Simple, clean, almost reassuring, almost. Evan's gaze drifted past her again, landing briefly on Marcus. Still watching, still waiting, and deep in the back of Evan's mind a thought he did not like was starting to take shape. Because if this was just system noise, why had Lena Whitaker shown up in person before sunrise to handle it? The driveway had never felt this exposed before. Evan stood there with his arms folded, but the position no longer gave him the solid, grounded feeling it usually did. It felt more like he was holding himself together. 90 days of logs. The number kept circling back through his head. 3 full months, busy months, messy months. Months where he had been putting out fires faster than he had been double-checking the paperwork behind them. He forced a slow breath in. You really drove out here for this. It came out quieter than his earlier pushback. Less bite, more fatigue. Lena did not take the bait. I drove out here because the automated review crossed a threshold. Her voice stayed level, but the words carried weight. Threshold. Another word that sounded too official for comfort. Evan's jaw tightened. What threshold? Lena hesitated. Brief, deliberate, then she answered. Variance between fulfillment confirmations and verified delivery exceeded acceptable tolerance across multiple reporting windows. Corporate language, clean, cold. But the meaning landed heavy in Evan's gut. This was not a single messy week. Not one bad batch. Pattern, again. He rubbed the heel of his hand against his forehead, frustration starting to push through the tight control he had been holding all morning. You know how small shops run when things spike, he said. We move fast or we drown. There's always noise when volume jumps. Part of him believed it. Part of him was starting to hear the strain in his own voice. Lena watched him carefully. I do know, no judgment, no sympathy, just fact. That almost made it worse. Evan exhaled slowly and let his arms drop to his sides. The defensive posture was getting harder to maintain. You could have opened with that on the phone. His voice was rougher now, less controlled. Lena's gaze did not waver. You stopped returning calls 2 weeks ago. The words landed clean, accurate, and uncomfortably personal. Heat crept up the back of Evan's neck. He looked away for half a second, eyes landing on the oil stain near the edge of his driveway that he had meant to clean months ago. I have been busy. It sounded weak the second it left his mouth. Behind Lena, Marcus finally shifted enough that the passenger door creaked softly as his weight changed. Still not speaking. Still watching. Waiting. Evan dragged a hand down his face again, slower this time. What exactly happens if this goes formal? The question sat low in his chest. Not quite fear, but closer than he liked. Lena answered without dressing it up. Your credit terms tighten first. Evan's stomach dipped. Then shipment volume gets restricted pending review. Another drop. And if discrepancies remain unresolved. She held his gaze steadily. Account suspension. The word hung in the air between them. Heavy. Final. Evan swallowed once. Hard. Because that was not just paperwork trouble. That was the shop's supply line. That was cars sitting half-finished on lifts. That was customers walking. That was payroll getting tight fast. He looked past Lena again, straight at Marcus this time. Marcus did not look away, calm, professional. Already halfway into decision mode. Evan felt something ugly twist low in his chest. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to fear wrapped in pride. He forced his shoulders back slightly. You are asking me to tear apart 3 months of floor activity based on system flags. Lena's voice stayed quiet. I am asking you to get ahead of this before the system stops asking." That landed deep, because Evan had worked in this business long enough to know the difference between a warning tap and the moment the machine decided to move without you. He exhaled slowly through his nose. The morning sun was fully up now, bright and unforgiving, lighting every crack in the concrete between them. "Fine." The word came out low. "Tight, I will pull the logs." For the first time since she arrived, Lena's shoulders eased a fraction. Not victory, not relief, just acknowledgement. Good. Evan rubbed the back of his neck again, tension still coiled there. But something inside him had shifted. Because agreeing to pull the logs meant one thing he did not want to sit with. If there really were gaps, he was about to find out exactly when things started slipping out of his control. The word "fine" was still hanging in the air when Evan realized something had shifted. Not outside. Inside him. The moment he agreed to pull the logs, the tight defensive wall he'd been holding all morning loosened just enough for something colder to slip through. Doubt. Thin. Persistent. He hated it. Lena seemed to sense the change too. Her posture softened by a fraction, not relaxed, just less braced for impact. "I will have my team hold escalation for 48 hours, she said. Professional, measured? But it landed heavier than anything else she had said so far. 48 hours. A clock. Evan's jaw tightened again. You already had a clock running. Not a question. Lena did not deny it. The automated review triggered late last night. Her voice stayed even. I came here before it advanced to the next stage. That sat uncomfortably in Evan's chest, because it meant this was not just routine oversight. This was early intervention, which meant the system had seen something it did not like. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly, feeling the tension knotted there. And if I need more time? The question came out before he could stop it. Not strong, not confident. Lena's eyes held his carefully. Then we talk again. Careful wording, not a promise, not a threat, just reality. Behind her, Marcus finally moved in a more obvious way. The passenger door opened with a soft mechanical click. The sound made something in Evan's spine stiffen instantly. Marcus stepped out of the sedan with calm, unhurried precision. Mid-40s. Clean-pressed shirt. The kind of quiet corporate presence that never raised its voice because it rarely had to. Up close, he looked exactly like he had sounded on the phone. Measured. Patient. Already 10 steps ahead in his head. "Morning, Evan," Marcus said. His tone was polite, neutral. But there was weight behind it now that had not been there through the glass. Evan forced himself to nod once. Marcus. The name came out tight. Marcus stopped a few feet away, giving space but not distance. "We are not here to make this harder than it needs to be," he said calmly. Evan felt irritation flicker again. "Then do not start with the supplier suspension language in my driveway." The words came out sharper than intended. Marcus did not react. Not defensive, not offended, just steady. "Understood," he said. A beat passed. Then Marcus added quietly, "But you know why variance flags matter." Evan's stomach tightened. Of course he did. Too many shops tried to move fast and cut corners. Too many systems were built to catch exactly that kind of slippage. The problem was, he had never considered being on the receiving end of that scrutiny. He exhaled slowly. "I said I will pull the logs." Marcus gave a small nod. And that is the right first step, reasonable, professional, infuriatingly calm. Evan dragged a hand through his hair, frustration finally showing through the cracks. This is a bad look to do in person. He gestured lightly toward the street. Lena's voice came quieter. It was meant to be private. Evan let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh but did not quite make it. You parked in my driveway at sunrise. Across the street, another curtain shifted. Yeah, real private. For the first time, Lena actually looked faintly uncomfortable. Brief, gone quickly. Marcus stepped in smoothly. "We can clear out," he said. "You have what you need for now." That was the first thing anyone had said all morning that actually lowered the pressure in Evan's chest by half a notch. Lena studied Evan one more time. "You will start with the last 90 days. Not a question." Evan nodded once. Tight, controlled, yeah. She gave a single acknowledging nod, then she moved back toward the driver's side door. Marcus followed a second later, but before he got in, he paused and looked back at Evan. Not hostile, not friendly, just direct. If there's nothing there, this closes clean. A beat, if there is something. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Evan felt the weight of it settle anyway. The passenger door closed. Then the driver door. The engine turned over smoothly. And as the gray sedan finally backed out of his driveway, the space it left behind did not feel like relief. It felt like the quiet before something expensive broke. Evan stood there long after the car disappeared down the street. Because for the first time in months, he was not thinking about how to keep the shop moving. He was thinking about what he might find when he finally opened those logs. The house felt too quiet after the sedan disappeared. Evan stood in the driveway a few seconds longer than he meant to, staring at the empty concrete where Lena's car had been. The morning had fully arrived now, sunlight sharp, sprinklers ticking down the block, a delivery van crawling past the corner like any other weekday. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal. He grabbed his travel mug off the hood of his truck and took a sip. The coffee had gone lukewarm. Of course it had. Evan turned and headed back inside, boots heavy on the front step. The moment the door shut behind him, the tightness he had been holding in his chest all morning pressed in harder. 90 days. He set the mug down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, hands braced on the edge of the laminate like he was steadying himself. This was probably nothing. System noise, scan lag, Tony moving too fast, closing tickets, all explainable, all fixable. He pushed off the counter and moved toward the small desk tucked into the corner of the living room. The laptop was already there, half buried under last night's paperwork and a folded invoice he had meant to review before bed. He had not. Of course. Evan lowered himself into the chair and flipped the laptop open. The screen lit up, clean, ordinary. His pulse did not feel ordinary. He logged into the shop management system first. Familiar motions, muscle memory. Fingers moving automatically even while that thin thread of unease tightened slowly in his gut. Dashboard orders. Fulfillment logs. He clicked into the 90-day window. For a few seconds, nothing jumped out. Just rows of tickets, dates, part numbers, technician initials, normal shop noise. See? He leaned back slightly in the chair, a small breath leaving his nose. This is exactly what I told them. But the relief did not fully land, because Lena had not driven across town before sunrise over nothing. Evan leaned forward again, zoomed in, sorted by flagged range. That was when the first small wrinkle appeared. Subtle, easy to miss if you were just scanning. 3 tickets, same day. Closed within minutes of each other. He frowned slightly, not impossible. Busy days did that sometimes. His fingers moved across the trackpad, cross-check intake timestamps. The system spun for half a second, then populated. Evan felt his shoulders stiffen. The delivery scan times were off. Not wildly, not obviously broken, just not lining up as cleanly as they should. He sat back slowly. Okay, that was something. Not proof, not a problem, just messy. He rubbed his jaw, irritation mixing with the slow creep of something less comfortable. Tony probably batch closed again. Happens when bays stack up. He clicked into another flagged cluster. Different week, different parts, same pattern, close together. Delivery confirmation lagging behind. A slow, cold feeling began to spread through Evan's stomach. He leaned forward again, this time more carefully. Pulled technician notes. Cross-checked intake. One more cluster. Then another. Each one small. Each one explainable. But together. Together they did not look as clean as he wanted them to. Evan dragged a hand slowly down his face. The room felt warmer than it had 10 minutes ago. Because this was no longer just theoretical pressure from a supplier review. This was his own data, his own floor, his own name attached to every single line. He stared at the screen for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Tony Ruiz's contact. For the first time all morning, the irritation had faded almost completely. What replaced it sat heavier, because something in the logs was definitely not lining up the way it should. And Evan was no longer completely sure he was going to like Tony's answer. Evan stared at Tony's name on his phone longer than he should have. It should have been a simple call, quick, routine, cleared up and move on. That was how this was supposed to go. Instead, his thumb hovered just above the screen, like something in his gut was quietly telling him to slow down. He ignored it and tapped. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Tony picked up on the 4th. Yeah, Tony's voice sounded thick with early morning gravel and leftover sleep. Evan did not waste time. You at the shop yet? Pause. Nah. Heading in now. Why? Evan leaned back slowly in his chair, eyes still locked on the open logs in front of him. Walk me through last Thursday's close-outs. Another pause. Longer this time. Which ones? Evan's jaw tightened. The 3 back-to-back installs just after lunch. There was a small shift in Tony's breathing on the other end. Not dramatic, but enough. Standard rush day, Tony said. Bays were stacked. I cleared the tickets once the work wrapped. Evan's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the desk. Before or after intake verification. Silence. Not dead air, breathing. Tony exhaled slowly. After parts were in the building. The answer came just a fraction too measured. Evan felt that cold thread in his stomach pull tighter. You sure about that? Another pause. Longer now. Yeah, too fast this time. Evan closed his eyes briefly. Tony, he said. Voice lower now. Supplier flagged 90 days of variance. That landed. Hard. Because the silence on the other end went completely still. What kind of variance? Tony's tone had changed. Less sleepy, more alert. Fulfillment confirmations posting ahead of delivery verification. Evan kept his voice even. Flat. Controlled. For several seconds, Tony did not speak. When he finally did, the edge in his voice was sharper. System lag does that sometimes. It was the same line Evan had used earlier. And suddenly it did not sound as solid as it had an hour ago. Evan leaned forward slowly. I need straight answers right now. The room felt very quiet. Tony's exhale came through the line, rougher this time. Look, we have been slammed, man. Sometimes intake scans post late. You know how it is when the dock gets backed up. Evan's eyes moved back to the screen. Cluster after cluster. Same pattern, Tony. His voice dropped another notch. How many times did you close tickets before physically confirming the parts were on site? Dead silence. Long enough that Evan's pulse started to pound in his ears. When Tony finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence. A few times, maybe. Only when we knew the shipment was already in transit. Evan's stomach dropped. That was not what he needed to hear. You cannot do that. The words came out sharper than he intended. Tony pushed back immediately. We were trying to keep the board clean. Customers were already calling about delays. And there it was, the crack. Small, but real. Evan rubbed his forehead slowly. How many times, Tony? This time the silence stretched even longer. When Tony answered, the number came out quiet. More than a few. Evan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the morning finally settling fully into his chest. Not fraud, not exactly, but not clean either. Not the kind of pattern supplier systems like to see. Not the kind of thing that passed quietly once it got flagged. Tony spoke again, more defensive now. Nothing was missing, Evan. Parts all landed, jobs got done, nobody got shorted. Evan believed that part. Mostly. But belief was not what supplier audits ran on. They ran on sequence, verification, clean data trails. And right now, his did not look clean. Evan exhaled slowly. Do not touch anything in the system today, he said. No backfills, no edits, nothing. Tony hesitated. Okay. I am pulling a full reconciliation, Evan continued. His voice was steady again now, but the earlier confidence was gone. And Tony, yeah, next time the dock is backed up, you wait. The line went quiet for a second. Then Tony gave a low, subdued reply. Got it. Evan ended the call and set the phone down carefully on the desk. The house was silent again, but the silence felt different now. He turned back to the screen. 90 days of messy sequencing. Not catastrophic, not fatal, but just sloppy enough to trigger exactly the kind of automated review Lena had warned about. Evan leaned back slowly and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. This was fixable. Painful, time-consuming, but fixable. Still. The pressure sitting in his chest had not fully eased, because the morning had started with a blocked driveway, and somehow it had ended with him realizing just how close the shop had been running to the edge without him fully seeing it. Outside, the neighborhood carried on like nothing had happened. Inside, Evan finally reached for the logs again, because the next 48 hours were going to decide whether this stayed a warning, or turned into something that hit a lot harder. If this moment made your chest tighten even a little, you already understand how fast small shortcuts can grow into real consequences. Subscribe to Final Text for more stories where quiet pressure turns into moments that change everything.